Okay, Reactionary Hippie is back on November 2020. And it's been over a month since my last commentary. And I think some of it's been circumstances, some of it's been dread that is maybe delay in making my comments. But I can't wait any longer, right? Election's been going on for several weeks. But election day, the final day, is coming right up on Tuesday, 2 days from now. So, from my vantage point on November 2020, I'm going to jump in with part 3 of the Reactionary Hippies election special. Yes, we have cleaned out our garden. We've canned like crazy. Last couple of weeks here in northern Colorado, we've had terrible fires that were finally slowed down a week ago by a giant snowstorm. Yes, that happens here, northern Colorado. We're not in the mountains, but we can have a huge snowstorm in October and still have 60 or 70-degree days after that. It's melted now. I had some good snow shoveling to do. All right. In the election special, in part 1, I talked about the difference between Trump and Trumpism. And then I talked about the constant attack on Trump as being illegitimate, coming out of an effort to discredit Trumpism and some of those ideas that I found very appealing, even if I didn't always find President Trump personally appealing. But the point of that was to condition the mind of people to never accept Trumpism, to tie it forever with Donald Trump. So I suppose, I'm just some guy sitting here in northern Colorado. I'm not one of these pundits who apparently are always right all the time, but I will make my limited comments on the details of the election that's coming up. I think Joe Biden will win the popular vote under almost any circumstance. And I think despite what being told, it could go either way in the Electoral College. It's too close to call in the states that will make the difference. And I say this with trepidation. Watch Pennsylvania. There's been violence there this past week. There's been a Supreme Court non-decision, United States Supreme Court non-decision, that allowed the decision in Pennsylvania to stand to count ballots for up to 3 days after Election Day, whether or not they're postmarked. Welcome to the world of not very carefully thought through mail-in balloting. So I expect chaos there, but we'll see what happens. Back in part 2 of this series, I talked about how we've been programmed a bit, prepared with the war games that were carefully leaked out to signal that, if it should happen that America made a mistake and voted for Trump, there'd be a reaction to say that was illegitimate. Or if it seemed like an election night that Trump was doing well, we shouldn't be surprised to hear about a blue shift where all these ballots magically appeared that would help Joe Biden instead. That was a month ago, but in the weeks in between, it was kind of interesting. There was sort of a shift. Gosh, almost like they coordinate these things. The Salon magazine online, The Atlantic, running articles about de-Trumpification. They had gotten so confident that Biden would win, they started talking about what they needed to do to America and to the people who supported Trump to make sure Trump could never happen again. It was eerie. It was echoing the kind of rhetoric around denazification after World War II in Germany, and in my living memory, the rhetoric about South Africa to make sure that right sort of thinking would always prevail and certain ideas were never discussed again. But now I think they've retreated from that because it's on a knife edge. They say officially that Biden's got it in the bag, but it's not true. The close states like Florida, Arizona, which Florida has to, put it this way, President Trump has to win Florida. If he doesn't win Florida, it's over. There are other scenarios after that, but look closely after that at Pennsylvania and Arizona, and then the upper Midwest after that, Wisconsin, Michigan, a reach, Minnesota. But we'll see what happens. So, but the point of part 3, though, is to say the election's going to happen. It might be chaos. I think it will be. I hate to say that about my country. but it might not. But it's going to happen one way or another, and Trump will win or Biden will win. But the bigger picture here is what happens to Trumpism without Trump. And I prefer Trumpism to Trump, as I told you before. I like those nationalist policies that say, let's put Americans first, let's reindustrialize America, let's spread the wealth, let's look out for each other, let's look out for ourselves in the world and be a nation with self-respect, and not just give in to a globalism that empowers a small elite crust that tries to run the whole world. Well, this is the nationalist populism that I like, and I'm sorry to say, I don't think it's going to last. I think Trump tapped into something real, but Trump could not by himself build networks, build these cadres in politics, draw on this pool of people to hire. I mean, say this modestly, people like me just kind of gave up and said, I'm not going to be part of national politics or big institutions because I'll have to fight all the time just to keep my place. I'd rather take care of people locally and build up a business or build up a practice where people knew that didn't matter what their opinions were, I would give them the best service I could and the best advice I could and help them. But people like me went home. There wasn't this pool of people in Washington eager to jump on the Trump bandwagon and build up nationalist populism. So I don't see any depth here. That's been the problem staffing the Trump administration for the last 4 years. It's going to be the problem going forward. Now, maybe people better than I am will build up new institutions that can supply these people, that can encourage these people, that can say, no, we need a modest, strong United States of America that looks out for its own people. But I'm not so sure. Here's the problem. Even if Trump wins in 2020, the left is going to win sometime. And what we're seeing now is that it's trying to close the door so this can never happen again. There can never be a reaction. There can never be another Trump. There can never be a return of nationalist populism. What will they do to create that? Well, I'm just kind of shocked because I grew up with Democrats and Republicans. And in the very center of Democrat discussions are extremely radical policy proposals. And they're being set forth like it's something we've talked about for years, but they're really quite radical. I remember the 90s when Bill Clinton would carry on about shutting down illegal immigration and making sure people came here the right way. I think as late as when Obama was running for office in 2008, we heard that a lot. Bill Clinton would say abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. But now what's on the table? Well, I read The Atlantic, I read Slate, I read Salon, so you don't have to. And they're saying we have to have a mass amnesty of all the people here illegally, make them all citizens right away. The low-end numbers of that number of people would be 11 to 12 million. I think it's easily over 20 million. And once they're here legally, they will bring in family members and friends by chain migration. So we'll have millions more. Democrats have made clear that for the first time in memory that open borders are fine. So there'll be millions more coming that way. And they've said, well, we should also add, the Senate has been a problem for them, so let's add 4 more states to California. Let's break it into 5 states. Let's give statehood to the District of Columbia and to maybe in Puerto Rico. And suddenly we'll have, how many is that? 4, 5, 6, 12 more Democratic senators guaranteed. Then the Senate won't be a barrier to any leftist legislation. And they've said quite clearly, I mean, they're going to pack the Supreme Court and expand the Supreme Court to make up for President Trump exercising his constitutional prerogative to appoint somebody to the Supreme Court. In 1937, my favorite Theodore Roosevelt, no. In 1937, Franklin Delano Roosevelt proposed a plan to pack the Supreme Court. And even his outsized Democratic majorities in the House and Senate rebelled against that destruction of the institutional checks and balances in our system. Those checks and balances are up for grabs now. But, they don't have to do that much, right? They've talked about getting rid of the Electoral College. Why do that? Once you bring in a whole new bunch of people, Florida, Texas, Georgia, they'll never vote Republican again. What's really going on here is an effort to change the American regime. And I don't mean to be inside baseball here, but I'm using regime in the sense of how political philosophers talk about regime. Oh, if I haven't lost you yet, hang on. A regime is not... Popularly, we talk about a regime as a bunch of bad guys over there. We call them a regime. But there's a term of art to using regime. It says regime is the system. It's got the rules within which we play politics. So certain things, even if we're unconscious about it, certain things are just off limits in our regime, right? We don't decide elections with tanks in the streets. Some things are off limits because these are the rules of the game that we decided on. We call that a constitution, typically. So some things can be dirty tricks and rough and tumble, but those are ordinary politics. We don't cross certain lines. That's the regime. Those are the rules of the game. But we are living in a time when most of our elites, who used to have different opinions about what kind of country we should be, but still agreed on the basic rules of our country, we live in a time where most of our elites have given up on the mythical and not so mythical founding bases of our country. And I think the best example of this is the rhetorical refounding of our country by our friends at the New York Times, pushing the 1619 Project. It's a pack of lies, as even many liberal historians have noticed. But you could not stand the regime of 1607, 1620, 1776, 1787, the colonial experience as varied as it was. You had to say it was all illegitimate. The only thing that mattered was the stain of slavery. The stain of slavery is real, but it's not the only thing that mattered. But it was a way to say the real founding of our country, the real basis of our regime, our rules, was evil, was forever compromised by slavery. I mean, you would have to not notice that slavery was universal around the world throughout history, and that only in the United States and a few other places was there a pushback against it and a war to end it. But no, don't notice those things. Just notice that the United States was forever compromised by its origins, and the real founding was 1619 with the evil basis of it. In the old days, the elites would argue about the tariff rate, or how we should expand and how fast. And I guess more recently, more boringly, what capital gains tax rate should be, or how fast should social welfare expand. But we're past that now. This is like a referendum on the legitimacy of the United States of America. So even 1960s radicalism was not like what we're facing now. Back then, as angry and violent as it sometimes were, it was more calling America to account. These are our founding ideals. How do we actually express them? We're past that now. The polarization is so bad. The radicalism is so great. I think these calls for mass immigration they reflect a disappointment with the people who are actually here. And this might be obscure, but it makes me think of a communist German playwright and writer and polemicist named Bertolt Brecht. And so I looked him up, and I wrote it down over here. Brecht talked very tellingly about creating a new regime. And he wrote a poem called, my German is terrible, I'm safer in French, but Die Lösung, right? The solution. This was in the early 50s when there was apparently some enthusiasm about the Soviet regime in East Germany. I will read the English translation of Die Lösung. After the uprising of the 17th of June, the secretary of the Writers' Union had leaflets distributed on the Stalinallee, stating that the people had forfeited the confidence of the government and could only win it back by increased work quotas. Would it not in that case be simpler for the government to dissolve the people and elect another? Here we are. The government, or the permanent establishment that runs the government, the national security apparatus, the globalist enablers on both sides of the aisle, they're tired of this people. They want to elect another. Small, determined minorities make the culture, and most others just go along. So you have to look hard at the world you live in. Everywhere you look, they're going to tell you that you are an anti-fascist hero for just acquiescing in something that globalist elites in both parties want, a new corporatocracy. Oh, we'll have mass immigration, we'll have cheap labor, your opinions will be monitored all the time, you'll have a social credit score to tell you that you're doing right. That's what we're facing. And I don't think that will look like the United States of America that I knew. And I read the Constitution closely. It talked about our posterity. And I felt that strongly because my people were there and we're here now. And we should have a voice in deciding what kind of people are here in the future. It's gotten bigger than just pro-Trump or anti-Trump. It's a referendum on the United States of America. We can have good arguments about what it should be, but we're crossing the line into arguments about whether it should be at all. It's really happening. So there will be chaos in the coming weeks. It will be strange. I can't predict what will happen. I just know we're in new territory. But deep down, the reactionary hippie is optimistic. He has young children. He believes that there's a reason we're here, and there's always something on the other side of chaos. So we Americans are smug sometimes. We're not used to this. But there'll be a we on the other side. There'll be a path on the other side. And the reactionary hippie will start talking about canning and education and doing things with children, because finally this election will be over and we will find a way. I appreciate your interest and your patience. Be prepared for the worst, but know something better will come too. November 1, 2020, the Reactionary Hippie is signing off. Good night.